Hey friends, my name is Helms, and in this video you will learn how to create and edit an engaging cinematic short video entirely filmed on your smartphone. Many of you asked me to break down how I filmed and edited my shot on iPhone cinematic videos. Well, let's break it down. Okay, before we get started though, a big thank you for all the kind words that you left on the iPhone 15 Pro video. Your thoughtful comments, ideas and feedback mean a ton to me. I read every single one, and we hit a freaking 100,000 subscribers, which is a massive milestone I've been working to. I really appreciate you all joining the team. If you haven't done so, consider coming on board. Everything I know about filmmaking and video editing I learned on YouTube and by just trying it. So I know how important it is to watch these kind of breakdowns and have a look under the hood on how certain techniques work, just as an inspiration as well. So I won't withhold any information from you. I spill all my secrets to share how I exactly edited this video. This is going to be a long one, so get your favorite beverage and lean back. Now it all starts with the filming and the gear we use. And the good news is that I didn't use that many accessories to shoot on the iPhone 15 Pro. The key one that I use the most is definitely the DJI Osmo Mobile 6 gimbal. I would guess like 80% of the shots, maybe 70% of the shots were filmed holding the camera, the phone on this gimbal. This is possibly the key accessory that I would recommend to everyone. I will leave links to all the gear that I'm talking about and all the plugins in the description below, so you can check it out there. I also used the Beast Grip, I think it's called Beast Grip Pro, which is basically a monster phone holder. It allows you to have more grip on your camera, on your phone, but also install filters, and with the right mounting points, you can also attach a mount to hold your SSD as you may be shooting into that to record your videos. I didn't use filters that often to get that cinematic motion blur on this shoot because I was more in a run and gun setup and wanted to be quick and shoot in the moment. So obviously the more accessories you add, the more settings you want to dial in, the more complicated it gets, the more you need to take a break and maybe you miss the shot. As mentioned, you can record now with a USB-C port into an SSD. I'm using the small rig mount that I can also attach to the Osmo gimbal here. Just one watch out, use a light flexible cable driving to your SSD so you don't have an additional pull on the gimbal because it may shut down then. Now I shot 95% of this thing on the native camera app, but you can also use third-party apps like Filmic Pro or the new Blackmagic camera app, which is free and it allows you to dial in settings manually when it comes to exposure time, your ISO, your white balance, all things that you can't control in the native app, you can actually dial in there manually. So now if you are in a situation where you have a little bit more time and you can dial in all the settings and you want to use filters, I would absolutely recommend using this app. But don't worry, as mentioned, the majority of the video was shot in the native camera app. And while the settings are limited, there's still a few things that you want to dial in. First and foremost, 99% of the video was shot in ProRes Apple Log. And I made a whole video about this up here that you can check out after watching this, that goes into depth about Apple Log and the advantages it gives you and why you should shoot in it. Next, you want to lock the white balance, and this is something yet you can enable in the settings. So this basically means that once you hit record, there's no shift in the white balance. So the color doesn't shift around if you turn into a different scene, something that is often associated more with amateur filmmaking. The same locking you also want to do with your exposure. So before you hit record, you want to tap on your subject and hold your finger on it, and after a few seconds you see AEAF lock. So that basically means that the auto exposure and the autofocus is locked on that subject and it doesn't shift around as soon as you turn into a brighter or darker scene. Last but not least, I highly recommend underexposing the log footage of an iPhone. It generally overexposes and then you have to deal with noise. So going with somewhere between minus 0.3 and 1 stop underexposed will get you to a nicer looking image. With your gear ready and your settings dialed in, you want to go out and shoot. I was shooting obviously a video about Chicago, so I went downtown and looked for micro scenes to tell small stories to bring cohesion to the edit and keep the viewers engaged, be it the train sequence, the one wheel change, the visit to the zoo, and the architecture. It all sticks together in little buckets, so you just want to go out and tell these micro stories. It's all about getting coverage filming that kind of video. Get different angles, close-ups, wide shots, play with the motion, the movement, and it can make something very mundane like a train ride look very interesting and dynamic. Let's get down to editing. I'm editing in Final Cut Pro, but the theory, the techniques, and many of the effects are available for any of the larger video editing software solutions, so this should be fun. So how do I approach these compilation videos which don't have necessarily a narrative thread? This can be akin to you going on vacation shooting a bunch of beautiful footage but not necessarily having a through line right from the get-go. You basically have to craft your story after the fact. Now for me, the very first step, if you can, you pick the song beforehand, because that allows you to think about what the pacing is and you can shoot accordingly. Now I found this song called Revival by Faded Light on Audio with double I, which is one of the 3 video licensing services that I use aside from Epidemic Sound and Artlist. I will leave links down in the description below, but that song really gave me and hooked me right from the get-go. It had a nice beat, it had a nice rhythm, and based on that I basically went out and shot with that song in mind right from the get-go. Next, when you come back then with all your footage, you want to go through that footage and see what shots actually worked out and distill it down. You want to create selects. Now, I do this in a separate timeline. I call it footage selection, and you see here already my selected shots. It's about an hour of footage for a video that turned out to be 2.5 minutes long. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of like how much footage I deem as good, and then actually what the eventual length of the video is. But that way you can also already compile your micro stories and create those little buckets that work nicely together. So sorting through your footage and selecting the shots that are well composed and well lit is the very first step for you to start your edit. And let me tell you, the start is not easy. Sometimes I'm sitting in front of an edit, even if I have the song, and don't know where to get started. Don't be discouraged. You can't force that spark. Sometimes it takes a few days and it just comes. To give you an idea, I spent a couple of nights on this edit. In the beginning, it's always the most difficult moment to get started, but sometimes you just like have that moment of clarity where you see things falling together and then you get into the zone and you just hustle. You're in the flow of it. And you will see it will just come together sometimes magically. With all that said, let's get down into the edit. And let me give you first a global overview, because it can be very, very confusing in terms of all the steps that you see here, from the clips selected to the color grade to the effects to the text, and obviously also the music and the sound effects. To me, it all starts with the song. Usually I start just laying down the song as the bass line and then find the right clips that edit right to the beat, lay out these micro stories, and then from there I do the transitions, see if motions match together, do the color grading, add sound effects to it, and then add additional text and final animations to it. Now this whole video starts out with this hyper motion compilation here that really draws in the audience. At the beginning you really want to drive energy, because people, they have a short attention span and you want to draw the audience in right from the get-go. And it has to work also just visually, because sometimes thumbnails, they just play automatically. So you want to have something that draws in the audience's attention. And I selected this hypermotion compilation here. And in fact, actually, this was something I did at the very end, because I just couldn't find necessarily right from the get-go. I didn't have that spark of what I want to use to hook the audience. But during the course of the edit, I found these shots that worked very well for this kind of compilation. So when it comes to filming these shots that you see here, now these were all shot in 4K 24 frames per second on the gimbal, and I just walked or biked. A lot of them are actually biking, except for those that are indoors. And I just either went straight or orbited around a subject. And then after the fact, and you see this here, if I open up the speed of the clips, after the fact, I just sped them up. This is as easy as it gets. I found connecting tissue points here, for example, going down the stairs and then going down the escalator into the train. So this is all makes also narratively some sense. In order to get this motion blur in, you see I have just this adjustment layer of motion blur added. And therefore, it looks like as if it's almost shot and as in a hyperlapse natively with long exposure time, but eventually it's all in post-production. In order to inject additional energy into this, because you see there's actually no music playing at that point, you want to layer on a couple of sound effects. Now, whoosh sound effects are a very common use case when it comes to these hyperlapses, but I also added some steps in this case as it goes down, or in this case here we have some sound effects from a subway train. And outside here I was biking actually, so I added also some biking sound effects, really to make the whole thing very visceral. This is how I like to hook my audience through some visceral experiences that are relatable and natural in its manner. So it's not like necessarily the music that hooks it, but it's really the visuals and the audio components. Now, while we added, let me also talk about these two additional layers here that you see actually spanning the whole clip. And so one of them is actually a conversion LUT, because all this footage is shot in this flat logarithmic image profile. You need to convert the footage first and foremost into the normal Rec 709 color space, the standard color space. And I created a conversion LUT for the Apple log footage that you can download for free in the description below. And then the layer on top of that is actually the look LUT. In this project, I used my own iPhone cinematic LUT collection that you can check out right up here in my LUT store. I used the Grand LUT for the entire project, so you can get them as well if you really like that look. That you will see basically across the entire project here, the application of a conversion LUT and then the look LUT. Now that we got the audience hooked, we want to set really the groundwork of what this video is about. And in this context, we want to get out real fast that this was shot on the iPhone 15 Pro. Now, this is one of the shots that was actually not shot on the iPhone. Obviously, all the shots that you see of the iPhone in this video are not shot on the iPhone, but I really love these shots that were filmed on my Sony with a probe lens. I have a full video on the probe lens if you're interested, or somewhere on my channel, but it allows you to get this wide angle macro shot. And so I have this animation here shot on iPhone 15 Pro. The text animation that I'm using here on this shot is by Motion VFX. It's called M-Title Kinetic. I'm using Motion VFX a lot. I'll leave a link in the description below, but this pack in specific is very much designed to look like Apple ads or Apple fonts that they're using and the animations that they're using for their commercials. So since I had that pack, I thought it would be a fun way to open it, but honestly, you can do your own creative approach to the text animation. The next shot here is a time-lapse of the skyline. I'm using black and white to introduce a little bit of a concept that I used later on in the video, just to give the viewers a little bit of a heads up here. Again, I'm using the text animation from M-Kinetic Title. Now, the time lapses were shot with a native camera app in the iPhone, but later on I wanted to add some additional motion, and so I'm using a zoom in effect here to give it a little bit more of a motion rather than just static. You see what it looks like if it's just static. It's still cool time lapse because of all the clouds moving around, but I like that additional motion here. I also sped up the whole thing at the end here to really align with the song as well. So if we play the song here, you see that it had a little bit of a crescendo at the end, so that's what I aligned the visuals as well with. And that brings us into our first micro scene. This is my buddy Doug coming out from the stage door. Now the door was closed, but you can just pretend, and he just comes out with his one reel. And this shot right here is the only shot where I actually used the cinematic mode in this edit. This was intentional because I mostly wanted to try out the ProRes Apple log footage, and you see here I didn't need to apply a conversion LUT. That's why the layer is down below here, because those clips are already Rec 709 corrected, but then on top you see our grand look, the cinematic LUTs applied here, so they match really nicely, as you can see, between these clips. That's what you want to do in general, especially if you tell these micro scenes, and this is one and the same scene. You want to make sure that these shots are very similarly graded, and with LUTs oftentimes you can do this very easily. But again, this just goes to the point of coverage. We would just want to have that wide shot and then get a nice close-up here with that bokeh from the cinematic mode. It's really good. It's getting much better, honestly, as well, and I'm tempted to shoot another project using the cinematic mode a little bit more. But also here, I just have like a few sound effects, the sneakers coming out of the door, the closing door, and then also dropping the boosted board. Now, these are the first shots outside on the city. Here's like a little bit of a wider shot just to break a little bit the one wheel scene and give the impression that we are just like on that one wheel looking up, and you see already in the background, you hear I'm using a skateboard sound effect, but you as a viewer wouldn't know. And then transition over with an effect again from Motion VFX over here to that cool one wheel shot of Duck really barely making it over onto the bus stop here. And just for your information as well, like I shot this on the gimbal on the Osmo Mobile 6 while I was biking. I tried to hold it as low as possible here as well to give that energy, to have that look almost on the same level as the one wheel. And you see, even without using ND filters, I still got natural motion blur. This is yet another hyperlapse, again, same way. I walked around and then sped it up in post. Here it touched like a motion blur effect. What I want to point out in this case here is you see I'm moving from left to right, and then in the next shot I'm doing exactly the same. So what you want to do as you transition from between some shots, you want to create some consistency, either through motion or the placement of the focus of your subject, and we will see this in a little bit. Now from here we look up skyscraper. This is a little bit of like an architecture scene to really set the stage of Chicago. I'm a big fan of the Chicago architecture, if you can't tell. So I have this little micro scene of like beautiful architectural shots as we are exploring on our one wheel the city. But from there we go into a sequence with the people of Chicago, because humans are a great magnet for the viewers to be drawn in. How I did this here is through motion and focused placement. You see that this whole sequence between these different kind of shots from people with people in it flows very nicely. Between the motion direction as well as the placement of where your eye ends up, you can create some very fast edits that don't feel jarring, that don't feel like you're bouncing back and forth. This is one of my most important tips here that you see here. Use the same direction of motion as you create these little sequences, and the placement of the subject between shots is very important in order to create a nice flow. So if that's one of the big tips that you should take away from this. Now, next one up, I want to highlight again that this was shot on an iPhone. We went out actually shooting with that probe lens outside and got some nice walking shots here and activating log. Again, I mentioned I used that log footage a lot in this, so I wanted to just highlight that. And then we go into the next shot. Again, similar principles here apply. This is shot in 4K 60 frames per second, so you have a little bit of slow motion and then it speeds up as we go into the next shot. I tried to capture a lot of abstract architecture, and this was possible because on the 15 Pro Max you have that 5x zoom, which I was again very surprised by and used more than I thought, but it allowed me to frame up really abstract shots that I like to introduce here as well, because I'm a sucker for that kind of visual. So that's why you find them in here. And this is one of my favorites. This is the 5x zoom lens on the gimbal, and I just moved sidewards and it created this really nice parallax. Again, direction of movement, very important. Here we go from left to right, and here as well. And then we do a little bit of a twist here, because like I moved forwards to this shot, but then I just reversed it and sped it up even faster, and therefore you have this little boomerang effect that you maybe know from Instagram or so, and it kind of does a nice job here transitioning the movement. And this is another tip. So if you have a shot that you really like, but let's say the placement of the subject is just on the wrong side, you can mirror that image as long as there's no text. Or if you need the motion the other way and there's no one walking or biking, you can reverse that clip easily without losing the intentionality here. So I do this a lot in order to match my shots and make them flow nicely. Now from here we go into the next sort of micro scene, which is basically animals and the zoo of Chicago. So I did another little hyperlapse around the Lincoln Park Zoo sign, and then we go into the bird, and the bird looks from left to right, and then the monkey, and so do I. You see, like, we're all looking into the same direction, and our attention was drawn by this flamingo. You get the idea? And in this sequence, we also have a bunch of sound effects. Let me actually play this here without the music. Yeah, you barely hear it during the edit or when you see the final video, but you get the subliminal exposure to these sound effects, and it just brings it to life nicely. Now, one of my favorite scenes here in the zoo for sure is this shot here underwater with the seals. It's this push in here, again shot on the gimbal, and I do just like a little zoom effect here, zoom transition effect, in order to go into the water. And also the sea lion actually was coming from the other side, so I flipped this whole thing because I wanted to match the motion of the sea lion on the right hand side here, so that we zoom in and then have the same sea lion here. What I did also here is I basically created an underwater effect. On one side added sound effects from underwater environments, but also applied that underwater effect to the song itself. You have those effects here in Final Cut Pro underwater. I made some adjustment to the equalizer, and then it sounds all like this. And then with the music, so as if it's playing in the background above the water. And then we go outside the water here with an ink splash transition, as if the water is splashing onto the screen, and we go into a hyperlapse here at the Art Institute. Now I continued that sort of animal theme, but now we are looking at a metal animal with that line here. Again, it did added some sound effects from whooshes, but also that tiger roar. Now, that doesn't make sense that it's a tiger roar because it's a lion, but you get the idea. From there, we transition the roaring into a wind sound effect that we use here for this time lapse that we set up in Lincoln Park. You know, you want to not only have your visuals flow nicely from one shot to the other, but also your audio effects. And here we do another zoom out effect here to bring motion, extra motion into the time lapse shot. And here comes another static shot. And always when I have static shots that don't have much movement, I try to introduce this in post, either through some vertical movement or some zoom in. So you can be flexible here. And as we go through here, we have that motion again coming with that bird, doing some zoom in effects to really focus the viewer's attention. And then we switch from that sort of like higher paced, higher energy part of the song to something more chill. And this is where I decided to also have the parks, the nature part sort of Chicago breathe a little bit, meaning that given that there is less music, I also added less sound effects, keep those very subtle, and also you see the clips themselves are significantly longer, so it just plays nicely. It gives the viewer, you can't be hyper all the time, honestly. You need to give the viewer some time to relax, rest a little before you go up in the pacing again. And this is what this scene does. And nicely, oftentimes actually music does that for you. If you have a song picked, music oftentimes has these ups and downs naturally. So it forces you as an editor almost naturally to have these ups and downs with your visuals as well. So listen to the music, see what it does from a narrative perspective, and apply this to your edit as well. All right, what's next? This transition. This transition is something that a bunch of you asked about, and that was more of a coincidence where I was looking for certain shots, and I noticed that I have these two shots where the sunset is nicely framed, and it is actually, you see, this is shot on the 0.5x super wide angle lens of the camera, and in my opinion it has actually the nicest flare, so it doesn't look too bad on this shot. And I noticed that I have this on two shots here, so I actually decided to put them next to each other. And here's the trick again. That shot is flipped. So it's mirrored horizontally so that I can have the placement of the sun naturally transition here. And this is like, all it is here is a dissolve transition. And we go from that one sun shot to the next. It's not absolutely perfect, but it does totally work as the sun placement is the same. And then we speed up that clip here. It kind of turns into a hyperlapse, because from there we go into another shot of the iPhone, but then we go into the next compilation. So now the next sequence is an architecture one, and I like to dabble sometimes in black and white photography. I actually created a black and white LUT for my cinematic LUT collection, and I really wanted to apply it here. So I looked for a bunch of abstract architecture shots. A lot of them are shot on the 5x, if not on the 3x camera here. And the next sequence is my annual train sequence. I had this last year, but I feel like it brings a lot of great energy, so I tried to challenge myself and bring in another sequence with trains in Chicago. I use a lot of sound effects from the trains here, and you see like the motion is absolutely key as we're going through here, left to right. Oh, and then we have a little bit of an iPhone shot. This was like added at last. You see, I had a normal clip before, but then I realized like that is a nice sort of abstract shot that could almost be a train that I had of the iPhone. Now this shot is in original terms much slower, but I sped it up, and therefore it has this kind of flicker effect that works very nicely as if the train comes in. And then we transition here with a gimbal shot from outside to inside the train, and we are then leaving the station inside the train. The door closes. You always want to cut on motion. Now this is like a very basic editing tip. In this case here, I cut so that the door closed right the moment the next shot comes up, boom, and then we are inside. And this is another shot that many of you asked how I did this. Now, the effect itself here that we're seeing here right now is called a dolly zoom. A dolly zoom is where your camera movement opposes the movement of the zoom. So in this case, we are actually walking inwards, but I'm zooming out. Now, since I didn't want to pull zoom on the lens, I did this actually after the fact. So you see here, this is the original clip. I'm just walking straight with the camera through the train, and after the fact, apply zoom out effect that zooms in at the beginning and then zooms out slowly, and therefore you have this dolly zoom effect which kind of elongates the train as we progress through the time. It's a nice eye catcher. And here I am with another shot on the iPhone. Comes nicely with the motion of the train from left to right, boom. And now we go into a little bit of a higher paced section of the song and going into some street art, going into some buildings and some statues. It's all that left to right orbiting hyperlapse that was done here. This is all it needs. That way you can create cohesion. Oh, actually here, yeah, some little hidden gems that I hide sometimes in my videos. Here we have a shot inside the Apple store, and titanium is obviously like the big deal of the iPhone 15 Pro series. I actually have Sia Titanium a cappella version singing in the background. For those of you Sherlock Holmeses who found it, great job. There are a couple of Easter eggs, and then we go into the final sequence here. I wanted to kind of do a callback to the one-wheel shots here with Doug and his son. Really love this shot here underneath on Lake Street with the train tracks and the sun and the shadows. But here again, another sequence. You see like I'm applying certain techniques in this specific edit a few times. And you see here, I wanted to get a nice transition between this biker and that biker, so I'm zoomed in here and then zoom out. Again, this is all done in post. By the way, if you ever visit Chicago, do the architecture boat tour. It's one of the most favorite tourist attractions, and also for locals. We love to go as well, learn about the architecture in Chicago. It's one of the best things you can do, especially if you're in summer here. Another Easter egg here is the song Homecoming. Yes, you see, like, and I'm coming home again. It's sort of like capping off the story, and maybe we could start again means like I wanted to subliminally influence the audience to watch this whole thing again. You see what I did here? But the whole thing also ends up on the hyperlapse again with some different shots. At the end, the song fades out. I'm introducing my cinematic LUT collection that you can go and get. Just link it up here and in the description below. There's 5 LUTs in there, the conversion LUT, and it works really, really nicely with the iPhone footage. Now, this is the whole edit. Obviously, you go through this a couple of times, you tweak it and refine it as you go through the editing process. But I hope this breakdown and look under the hood answered a lot of your questions. If not, definitely let me know down in the comment section below if there's anything that I haven't really explained that you really wanted to know. Let me know down. I'm happy to answer it. As always, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good morning, have a good night, whenever and wherever you are around this beautiful planet. Bye bye.